Eleanor stepped off the dusty stagecoach, her legs shaking after the long journey from Boston. The Montana sun beat down on her dark blue dress as she looked around at the wide-open land. Tall mountains stretched across the horizon, and she had never seen so much empty space in her life. A tall man with a cowboy hat walked toward her. His boots made loud sounds on the wooden platform. He looked rich. His clothes were clean and well-made, and he carried himself like someone who owned everything around him. "You must be Eleanor," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep and serious. "I'm Jake McKenna." "Welcome to my ranch," Eleanor nodded, feeling nervous. She had come here to work as a teacher for a little girl. The letter said the job paid well and included a place to live. After losing her job in Boston when the family moved away, she needed this work badly. "Thank you. Mr. McKenna, I'm ready to start teaching your niece right away," she said, trying to sound confident. Jake looked confused for a moment. "Teaching? Oh, we can talk about that later. First, let's get you settled." He picked up her small bag. "The judge is waiting for us at the house." "The judge?" Eleanor's heart started beating faster. "Why do we need a judge?" "For the ceremony, of course." Jake was already walking toward a fancy carriage. "I know this is all happening fast, but my lawyer said everything was arranged." Eleanor hurried after him, her mind spinning. "What ceremony? What arrangement?" She wanted to ask more questions, but Jake seemed to think she already knew what was happening. Maybe this was some kind of welcome ceremony for new workers. The ride to the ranch took 30 minutes. Eleanor stared at the huge house as they got closer. It was bigger than any house she had ever seen, with white columns and a wide porch that went all the way around. Cowboys on horses moved cattle in the distance. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Built it myself over the past 10 years. Jake said with pride. "Started with nothing but a small piece of land and a few cows." Inside the house, a short man in a black suit was waiting. He had gray hair and kind eyes behind his glasses. "Judge Wilson," Jake said, shaking the man's hand. "This is Eleanor. Are you ready to begin?" "Of course," the judge smiled at Eleanor. "Such a lovely bride. Shall we start the ceremony?" Eleanor's mouth fell open. "Ceremony? Bride? I think there's been a mistake." Jake and the judge both looked at her strangely. "No mistake," Jake said slowly. "You're Eleanor Hartwell from Boston, right? Here for the arrangement your father's lawyer set up?" "Yes, but I'm here to be a governess. To teach children." The judge looked at the papers in his hands. "These documents say marriage arrangement between Jake McKenna and Eleanor Hartwell." Eleanor felt dizzy. Her father had died 2 years ago, leaving her with almost no money. His lawyer had helped her find this job in Montana. But marriage? She never agreed to marry anyone. "There must be some confusion," she said, her voice shaking. Jake ran his hand through his hair. He looked as confused as she felt. "My lawyer said everything was set up. A business arrangement. You needed a husband and I needed—" He stopped talking and looked embarrassed. "Needed what?" Eleanor asked. "Someone to help me look respectable for business deals. Some of the Eastern men won't work with a bachelor. They think unmarried men can't be trusted." Eleanor sat down in a chair, feeling weak. This was crazy. She came here to teach children, not to marry a stranger. "What about your niece?" she asked. "What niece?" "The little girl I'm supposed to teach." Jake shook his head. "I don't have any nieces." They stared at each other for a long moment. The judge cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should postpone this," he said gently. "No," Jake said firmly. "The papers are legal. If we don't go through with this, there could be problems with the business deal. And Eleanor, you came all this way. Do you have anywhere else to go?" Eleanor's heart sank. She had spent her last money on the train ticket to Montana. She had no job waiting back in Boston and no family to help her. She was completely alone. "I don't understand any of this," she said quietly. "Look," Jake said, sitting down across from her. "This doesn't have to be a real marriage. We can figure out the legal stuff later. But right now we both need this arrangement. You need a place to stay, and I need a wife for business reasons. We can help each other." Eleanor looked around the beautiful house. Outside she could see the mountains and the endless sky. It was better than going back to Boston with nothing. "It would just be for business?" she asked. "Just for business," Jake agreed. "You'll have your own room. We'll live like business partners." The judge was looking back and forth between them. "Are you both sure about this?" Eleanor took a deep breath. What choice did she have? "Yes," Jake nodded. "Yes." 20 minutes later, Eleanor found herself married to a man she had just met. The ceremony was short and simple. When Jake kissed her cheek at the end, her face turned red. The judge congratulated them and left quickly. Eleanor stood in the big house wearing a simple gold ring, wondering what had just happened to her life. Everything had changed in one afternoon. She was no longer Eleanor Hartwell, the unemployed governess from Boston. She was now Mrs. Eleanor McKenna, wife of one of the richest ranchers in Montana. Jake showed her to a bedroom upstairs. It was bigger than her entire apartment back in Boston, with a soft bed and a window that looked out over the ranch. "I'll have the cook bring you some dinner," he said awkwardly. "Tomorrow we can talk about how this will work." After he left, Eleanor sat on the bed and tried not to cry. She had wanted a new start in life, but not like this. She was married to a stranger in a strange place with no idea what would happen next. All she could do was hope that somehow everything would work out. Eleanor woke up confused. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she saw the unfamiliar room and remembered everything. She was married to a stranger in Montana. She got dressed quickly and went downstairs. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the air. A kind-looking woman with gray hair was cooking in the kitchen. "Good morning, dear," the woman said with a warm smile. "I'm Betty, the cook. Mr. Jake told me all about you. Congratulations on your marriage." Eleanor didn't know what to say. "Thank you." "He's in his office," Betty pointed down the hall. "Had his coffee an hour ago. That man works too hard." Eleanor found Jake sitting behind a big wooden desk looking at papers. He looked up when she walked in and they both felt awkward. "Good morning," he said stiffly. "Good morning." Eleanor sat down in the chair across from him. "We need to talk." Jake put down his papers. "Yes, we do. I've been thinking all night about this situation." "Me too. This is all wrong, isn't it?" "Completely wrong." Jake stood up and walked to the window. "I never wanted to get married. I like my life the way it is. I built this ranch by working hard and making smart choices. I don't need complications." Eleanor felt hurt even though she knew he was right. "I never wanted to marry a stranger either. I came here to work and start a new life. Not to be someone's fake wife." Jake turned around. "So we agree. This marriage is a mistake." "Yes." "Good. So I'll contact my lawyer today. We can get this annulled. That means erased, like it never happened." Eleanor should have felt relieved, but instead she felt worried. "How long will that take?" "I'm not sure. Maybe a few weeks. Maybe longer. What am I supposed to do until then? I spent all my money getting here." "I can't go back to Boston." Jake sat back down. He looked tired. "I've been thinking about that too. You can stay here until the annulment goes through. I'll pay you like you're working for me." "Doing what?" "I don't know. Help Betty in the kitchen. Keep the house organized. Whatever you want." Eleanor felt a little better. At least she wouldn't be homeless. "And people won't think it's strange that we're married but living like strangers?" Jake's face got red. "That's the problem. Half the town was at the general store yesterday when Judge Wilson mentioned our wedding. By now everyone knows. Oh no. My foreman Tom congratulated me this morning. Said it was about time I settled down. The banker's wife already wants to have a dinner party for us." Eleanor put her head in her hands. "This is a disaster. It gets worse. I have a big business meeting next week with some cattle buyers from Chicago. I told them I was married because they mentioned they don't like doing business with bachelors. If they find out I'm getting an annulment right away, I'll look like a liar." They sat in silence for a moment. "So what do we do?" Eleanor asked. "We pretend. For a few weeks, until after my business deal is done. Then we can quietly get the annulment. Pretend to be happily married? We don't have to be happy. Just married. We can say we're still getting to know each other. That we're taking things slow." Eleanor thought about it. She didn't have any other choice. "What will people expect from us?" "I don't know. I've never been married before." Jake looked as confused as she felt. "I guess we'll have to eat meals together. Maybe go to church on Sunday. Act friendly when people are around. And when we're alone, we'll stay out of each other's way. I work most of the day anyway. You can do whatever you want." It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was something. Eleanor nodded. "Okay, but I want to be useful. I don't want to just sit around doing nothing." "Fine, Betty can always use help. And maybe you can handle some of the paperwork." "I hate writing letters. I can do that. I had good schooling back east." Jake looked surprised. "Good. That would actually help a lot." Over the next few days, they tried to make their strange arrangement work. Eleanor helped Betty with cooking and cleaning. She also started organizing Jake's messy office and writing letters to his business partners. She was good at it, and Jake seemed impressed, but it was hard to pretend they were married when other people were around. At church on Sunday, everyone wanted to talk to them. The women asked Eleanor about her dress and how she liked Montana. The men slapped Jake on the back and made jokes about married life. "You're a lucky man, Jake," said Mr. Peterson, who owned the bank. "Your wife seems like a real lady." Jake put his arm around Eleanor's shoulders. It was the first time he had touched her since the wedding, and it made her feel strange. "Yes, I'm very lucky." Eleanor smiled and tried to look happy, but inside she felt like a fraud. The hardest part was the evenings. After dinner, they didn't know what to do. Jake usually went back to his office to work. Eleanor would sit in the parlor and read or sew. Sometimes they would talk a little about the ranch or the weather, but mostly they avoided each other. Eleanor found herself watching Jake when he didn't know it. He was handsome, she had to admit, and he wasn't mean to her. He was just distant, like he was trying not to get too close to her because he knew she would be leaving soon. One evening, Betty made a comment that surprised them both. "You two are the politest married couple I've ever seen," she said while clearing the dinner dishes. "Most newlyweds can't keep their hands off each other. You act like you just met." Eleanor and Jake looked at each other uncomfortably. "We're just taking things slow," Eleanor said. Betty laughed. "Slow? Honey, you're married. There's no need to be shy." After Betty left, Eleanor and Jake sat in awkward silence. "Maybe we need to act more like a real couple when people are around," Eleanor said quietly. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. Sit closer together, talk more. Look like we actually like each other." Jake nodded slowly. "You're probably right. People are starting to notice." "It's just pretending," Eleanor said quickly. "Just for a few more weeks." "Just pretending," Jake agreed. But as Eleanor went upstairs to her room that night, she wondered why the idea of pretending to care about Jake didn't feel as difficult as it should have. In fact, it was getting easier every day, and that scared her more than anything else. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, and Eleanor was starting to feel more comfortable at the ranch. She had learned the names of all the cowboys who worked for Jake. She could make Betty's famous biscuits almost as well as Betty herself. And she had organized Jake's office so well that he could actually find his important papers. The pretending was getting easier, too. When people came to visit, she and Jake would sit close together on the porch. Jake would put his hand on her shoulder when they talked to neighbors. Eleanor would smile and call him dear in front of other people. To everyone else, they looked like a happy couple who were still getting to know each other. But Eleanor was starting to realize something that scared her. She wasn't just pretending anymore. She really was starting to care about Jake. She liked watching him work with the horses. He was gentle but strong, and the animals trusted him. She liked how he always said please and thank you to Betty and the other workers. He wasn't mean or bossy like some rich men she had known. And when he smiled, which didn't happen often, it made her heart beat faster. The problem was she could tell Jake was still keeping his distance. He was polite and kind, but he never really talked to her about anything important. It was like he was being careful not to get too close because he knew she would be leaving soon. Eleanor tried not to think about leaving. She tried not to think about going back to Boston with no job and no money. She tried not to think about how empty her life would feel without the ranch and the mountains and Jake. Then came the storm. Eleanor woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of thunder. Rain was pounding against her window so hard she thought it might break. Lightning lit up her room every few seconds, and the thunder was so loud it shook the house. She had always been afraid of storms, ever since she was a little girl. In Boston, she would hide under her blankets until the thunder stopped. But this Montana storm was bigger and louder than any storm she had ever experienced. A huge crash made her jump out of bed. It sounded like something had fallen on the house. Then she heard Jake's voice in the hallway. "Eleanor, are you okay?" She opened her door and found him standing there with a lamp. His hair was messy and he looked worried. "I'm fine," she said, trying to sound brave. "What was that noise?" "Part of a tree fell on the roof. It broke through the ceiling in the guest room next to yours. You can't stay in your room tonight. There's water everywhere and the ceiling might cave in." Eleanor looked back at her room. Sure enough, water was starting to drip through the ceiling. "Where will I sleep?" Jake looked uncomfortable. You can have my room. I'll sleep on the couch downstairs. I can't take your room. I'll sleep on the couch. Don't be silly. My room is the safest place in the house. It's on the other side, away from the damaged area. Eleanor wanted to argue, but another huge crash of thunder made her jump. She was too scared to be stubborn. Jake's room was bigger than hers, with a huge bed and a fireplace. He gathered some blankets and a pillow. I'll be downstairs if you need anything, he said. Wait. Eleanor felt foolish, but she was too frightened to be alone. Could you stay for a few minutes? Until the storm gets quieter? Jake hesitated. I don't think that's a good idea. Please. I know it's silly, but I've always been afraid of storms. Another flash of lightning filled the room, followed immediately by thunder. Eleanor flinched. Jake sighed and sat down in the chair by the fireplace. Okay, but just until it calms down. Eleanor got into the big bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. Having Jake in the room made her feel safer, but it also made her nervous in a different way. Tell me about the ranch, she said, wanting to hear his voice over the storm. How did you build all this? Jake was quiet for a moment. I came here with nothing when I was 20. Just a saddle and a horse and $50. I worked for other ranchers for 5 years, saving every penny. That must have been hard. It was. I lived in a tiny cabin with 3 other cowboys. We ate beans and bread for every meal. But I had a plan. What kind of plan? I knew this land would be perfect for cattle. Good grass, plenty of water from the streams that come down from the mountains. So I saved my money and bought a small piece of land. Just 100 acres. Eleanor turned on her side to look at him. How did you turn 100 acres into all this? Hard work. Smart choices. A little bit of luck. Jake smiled slightly. And a lot of help from good people like Tom and Betty. The storm was starting to get quieter, but Eleanor didn't want Jake to leave. She liked hearing him talk about his life. Do you ever get lonely out here? She asked. The question seemed to surprise him. Lonely? I'm too busy to be lonely. That's not the same thing. Jake was quiet for a long time. Sometimes, he finally admitted. Especially in the winter when the work slows down. The house feels too big for one person. Is that why you agreed to the marriage arrangement? Not just for business? Another long pause. Maybe, I don't know. I told myself it was just for business, but what? Maybe I was tired of being alone. They looked at each other across the room. The storm was definitely getting quieter now, but neither of them mentioned it. I should go, Jake said, standing up. Jake. Eleanor's voice was soft. Thank you. For everything. For giving me a place to stay. For being kind to me. I know this situation is strange for both of us. Jake walked toward the door, then stopped. Eleanor, yes? I'm glad you're here. I know this isn't what either of us planned, but I'm glad. Before Eleanor could respond, he was gone. Eleanor lay in the dark, listening to the rain get softer. Her heart was pounding, but not from the storm anymore. Something was changing between her and Jake. She could feel it. She was almost asleep when she heard Jake come back upstairs. The wooden floors creaked as he walked down the hall. Then she heard him stop outside the bedroom door. Eleanor? His voice was very quiet. Are you awake? Yes, the door opened slowly. Jake stood there in the dim light. I can't sleep, he said. I keep thinking about what you said. About being lonely. Eleanor sat up in bed. Come in. Jake stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. This is probably a mistake. Probably, but he came and sat on the edge of the bed anyway. They looked at each other for a long moment. We're supposed to be getting an annulment, Jake said quietly. I know. This will make everything more complicated. I know. Jake reached out and touched her face gently. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you either. What happened next felt natural and right, even though they both knew it would change everything. They were two lonely people who had found something unexpected in each other. The storm outside was ending, but a different kind of storm was just beginning in their hearts. Afterward, Eleanor lay next to Jake, listening to him breathe. She was afraid to move or speak, afraid to break the spell. She had never felt so close to another person in her life. When Jake's breathing became deep and steady, Eleanor knew he was asleep. She stayed awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and wondering what would happen in the morning. Would Jake regret what had happened? Would he still want the annulment? Everything had changed tonight, and Eleanor wasn't sure if it was for better or worse. All she knew was that pretending to be Jake's wife was going to be a lot harder now that she was falling in love with him for real. Eleanor woke up alone in Jake's bed. For a moment she felt confused, then everything came rushing back. The storm, their conversation, the way Jake had looked at her, the way he had touched her face so gently before. She could hear voices downstairs and smell bacon cooking. Jake was probably already working. Eleanor quickly got dressed and went to her own room to fix her hair. In the mirror, she looked different somehow. Her cheeks were pink and her eyes seemed brighter. When she went downstairs, Jake was sitting at the kitchen table with Tom, his foreman. They were talking about fixing the roof damage from the storm. "Good morning," Eleanor said, trying to sound normal. Jake looked up at her, and for a second she saw something warm in his eyes. Then he seemed to remember that Tom was there, and his expression became neutral again. "Morning. Did you sleep well after the storm?" "Yes, thank you." Eleanor poured herself coffee with shaking hands. "Is the damage bad?" "Could be worse," Tom said. "We'll have it fixed in a few days." After Tom left, Eleanor and Jake were alone in the kitchen. Betty had gone to town for supplies. "About last night," Jake started to say. "It's okay," Eleanor said quickly. "We don't have to talk about it, but we do." "What happened?" "It changes things." Eleanor sat down across from him. "Does it? We can just pretend it didn't happen." "Like we pretend everything else," Jake frowned. "Can you really pretend it didn't happen?" Eleanor looked at her coffee cup. No, she couldn't pretend. Every time she looked at Jake now, she remembered how it felt to be close to him. How safe and happy she had felt in his arms. "I don't know," she admitted. "Eleanor, I need you to know that I don't expect anything from you. Just because of last night doesn't mean you owe me anything. I know that. And it doesn't change our arrangement. If you still want the annulment when my business deal is finished, we'll get the annulment." Eleanor felt her heart sink. "Is that what you want?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know what I want anymore." Before Eleanor could respond, they heard a carriage coming up the road. Jake looked out the window and his face went pale. "Who is it?" Eleanor asked. "Victoria Sterling." "Who's Victoria Sterling?" Jake stood up quickly. "Someone I used to know. I need to go talk to her before she comes in." But it was too late. The front door opened and a beautiful woman walked in like she owned the place. She had blonde hair, expensive clothes, and the kind of confidence that came from growing up rich. "Jake, darling." Victoria rushed over and threw her arms around him. "I came as soon as I heard the ridiculous news." Eleanor felt sick. This woman was stunning, and she obviously knew Jake very well. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" Jake stepped back, looking uncomfortable. "I'm here to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life." Victoria finally noticed Eleanor. "And you must be the little governess who tricked poor Jake into marrying her." Eleanor's mouth fell open. "I didn't trick anyone." "Of course not, dear." Victoria's smile was sweet but mean. "I'm sure it was all just a happy accident." Jake stepped between them. "Victoria, that's enough. Jake, we need to talk, privately." Victoria looked at Eleanor. "Maybe you could go dust something?" Eleanor felt her face turn red with anger and embarrassment. She stood up. "I'll leave you two alone to catch up." She went upstairs to her room and closed the door, but she could still hear their voices downstairs. Victoria's laugh was loud and confident. Eleanor sat on her bed and tried not to cry. Who was Victoria Sterling? And why did she act like she had a right to save Jake from his marriage? 2 weeks passed and Eleanor felt more confused than ever. Victoria had rented a room at the hotel in town, but she came to the ranch almost every day. She acted like she and Jake were old friends who had some kind of special understanding. Jake seemed uncomfortable around Victoria, but he was polite to her. And he had become distant with Eleanor again. Since the night of the storm, they had barely spoken except when other people were around. Eleanor tried to act normal, but inside she felt terrible. She was tired all the time and food made her feel sick. At first, she thought she was just upset about Victoria, but then she started to suspect something else. When she realized she might be pregnant, Eleanor felt panic like she had never felt before. She counted the days on her fingers, hoping she was wrong. But she wasn't wrong. She was going to have Jake's baby. Eleanor spent 3 days trying to decide what to do. Should she tell Jake right away? Should she wait and see if Victoria left town first? Should she leave the ranch and never tell him at all? The decision was made for her when Betty found her throwing up behind the barn one morning. "Oh, honey," Betty said, helping Eleanor stand up. "How long has this been going on?" "A few days," Eleanor whispered. Betty looked at her with knowing eyes. "And when was your last monthly time?" Eleanor started crying. 6 weeks ago." "Well," Betty said gently, "I guess congratulations are in order." "Please don't tell anyone," Eleanor begged. "Not yet. It's not my place to tell. But honey, you can't hide this forever. And Jake has a right to know. I know. I just need time to figure out how to tell him." But telling Jake seemed impossible. Victoria was at the ranch every day now, talking about her family's business and how well she and Jake had always gotten along. Eleanor learned that Victoria's father owned banks in 3 states, and that Victoria and Jake had been engaged 2 years ago. "What happened to your engagement?" Eleanor asked Betty while they were making dinner. Betty sighed. Victoria decided she wanted to see more of the world before settling down. Broke Jake's heart when she left. He threw himself into work after that. Never looked at another woman until what? Until you came along. I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. Eleanor wanted to believe that, but it was hard when Jake barely spoke to her anymore. And it was especially hard when she watched Victoria touch Jake's arm and laugh at his jokes. One afternoon, Eleanor was in Jake's office working on his correspondence when Victoria walked in without knocking. "So this is where you hide all day," Victoria said, looking around. "Jake mentioned you help with his paperwork." "I try to be useful," Eleanor said politely. Victoria picked up one of the letters Eleanor had written. "Your handwriting is very nice, very schoolgirlish." Eleanor didn't respond. "You know," Victoria continued, sitting down in Jake's chair, "I feel sorry for you." "Why?" "Because you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. Jake is a complicated man. He needs a wife who understands his world, someone who can help him grow his business and fit in with important people. And you think I can't do that?" Victoria smiled. "Oh dear. Look at you. You're sweet, I'm sure, but you're just a governess from Boston. You don't know anything about ranching or business or the kind of life Jake wants to build." Eleanor felt anger rising in her chest. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough. I know you trapped him into this marriage somehow. And I know that when he realizes his mistake, he'll want to fix it." "What's that supposed to mean?" Victoria stood up and smoothed her expensive dress. "It means Jake and I have history. Real history. We understand each other. We want the same things, and when he gets tired of playing house with you, he'll remember that." After Victoria left, Eleanor sat alone in the office feeling worse than ever. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe Eleanor really didn't belong in Jake's world. Maybe she had been fooling herself to think that one night during a storm meant anything real. And now she was pregnant. How could she tell Jake about the baby when Victoria was trying so hard to win him back? Would he think Eleanor was trying to trap him, just like Victoria said? That evening at dinner, Victoria announced that her father was coming to visit the next week. "He's very interested in meeting you, Jake," she said sweetly. "He has some business ideas that might interest you." Jake nodded politely. "I'd be happy to meet him." Eleanor excused herself early and went upstairs. She sat by her window looking out at the mountains and tried to figure out what to do. In a few months, her pregnancy would be obvious to everyone. She couldn't hide it forever. But the thought of telling Jake while Victoria was around made her feel sick to her stomach. What if he thought she was lying? What if he thought she was trying to manipulate him into staying married to her? Eleanor put her hand on her still flat stomach. There was a baby growing inside her. Jake's baby. No matter what happened between her and Jake, this child would connect them forever. She just had to find the courage to tell him, and she had to do it soon, before Victoria's plans went any further. Because despite everything, Eleanor was starting to realize that she loved Jake, really loved him, and she was tired of pretending otherwise. Eleanor couldn't hide her pregnancy much longer. Her dresses were getting tight around the waist and she felt sick every morning. Betty had started giving her worried looks, and even Tom had asked if she was feeling well. She had been trying to find the right time to tell Jake for 2 weeks, but Victoria was always around. And when Victoria wasn't there, Jake seemed to be avoiding Eleanor. He worked late every night and left early every morning. The decision was taken out of her hands on a Tuesday morning when she fainted while helping Betty with breakfast. Eleanor woke up on the kitchen floor with Betty and Jake both kneeling beside her. Jake's face was white with worry. What happened? He asked Betty. She just collapsed, Betty said, but she was looking at Eleanor with knowing eyes. Jake helped Eleanor to a chair. Are you sick? Should I send for the doctor? Eleanor looked at Betty, who nodded encouragingly. Jake, Eleanor said quietly, we need to talk. Alone. Betty quickly left the kitchen. Jake sat down across from Eleanor, still looking worried. What's wrong? Are you ill? Eleanor took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. Jake stared at her for a long moment without saying anything. His face went through several different expressions. Surprise, confusion, and something that might have been fear. Are you sure? He finally asked. Yes, I'm about 8 weeks along. Jake ran his hands through his hair. From the night of the storm. Yes. He was quiet for so long that Eleanor started to panic. Jake, please say something. I don't know what to say. This changes everything, I know. I'm sorry. I didn't plan this. Jake looked up at her sharply. You're sorry? Eleanor, this isn't your fault. It takes 2 people to make a baby. Eleanor felt relief flood through her. At least he wasn't angry with her. What do we do now? She asked. I don't know. I need to think. Jake stood up and started pacing. Victoria's father is coming tomorrow. I have that big cattle deal to finalize. And now you're going to be a father. Jake stopped pacing and looked at her. For a moment, his expression softened. A father? I never thought I'd be a father. Are you happy about it? Jake was quiet again. I don't know what I am. Scared, maybe. Excited, maybe. It's a lot to take in. Before Eleanor could respond, they heard Victoria's voice in the front hall. Jake? Where are you, darling? Jake and Eleanor looked at each other. She can't know, Eleanor said quickly. Not yet. Why not? Because of the way people will talk. They'll count the months and realize the baby was conceived right after our wedding. It will look like that's why we got married. Jake frowned. So what if it does? It wasn't why we got married. We both know that. But other people won't. Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway looking beautiful as always. There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you. What do you need, Victoria? Jake asked, sounding tired. Daddy's train arrives at noon. I thought we could all have lunch together at the hotel. Victoria looked at Eleanor. All of us who matter anyway. Eleanor felt her face burn, but before she could respond, Jake stepped forward. Eleanor is my wife, Victoria. She matters to me. If you can't be respectful to her, maybe you should leave. Victoria looked shocked. Jake, I was just joking. It didn't sound like a joke. Victoria quickly changed her tone. Of course, Eleanor should come to lunch. I'm sorry if I sounded rude, but Eleanor could see the anger in Victoria's eyes. She was going to be even more determined to break up the marriage now. The lunch with Victoria's father was awful. Mr. Sterling was a big man with a loud voice who acted like he owned everything he saw. He barely acknowledged Eleanor's existence, but he spent the whole meal talking to Jake about business opportunities. My banks could finance a huge expansion of your ranch, he said, cutting his steak. Double your cattle, maybe triple them. Make you one of the biggest ranchers in the territory. Jake listened politely. That's generous, but I'm not sure I want to expand that fast. Of course you do. A man like you, with your ambition, you're just being modest. Victoria smiled at Jake. Daddy's right. You could be so much more than you are now. Eleanor felt sick, and not just from the pregnancy. She could see what was happening. The Sterlings were offering Jake everything he could ever want. Money, business success, social status. And Victoria came with the deal. What could Eleanor offer him? A confusing marriage that started by mistake, a baby he never asked for, complications he didn't need. After lunch, Eleanor excused herself and walked back to the ranch alone. She needed time to think. When Jake came home that evening, he found Eleanor in the garden behind the house. She was sitting on a bench watching the sunset over the mountains. Are you feeling better? He asked, sitting down beside her. Physically, yes. The sickness usually goes away by afternoon. And emotionally? Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Jake, do you want this baby? What kind of question is that? An honest one. This isn't how you planned your life. You never wanted to get married, and now you're going to be a father. If you could go back and change things, would you? Jake was silent for a long time. I don't know, he finally said. Everything happened so fast. 3 months ago, I was a bachelor with a simple life. Now I have a wife and a baby on the way, and Victoria is trying to convince me to change everything about how I run my business. And what do you want to do? I want to do what's right. That's not what I asked. What do you want? Jake looked at her. Why are you asking me this? Eleanor took a deep breath. Because I need to know if you're staying married to me because you want to, or because you feel like you have to. Does it matter? It matters to me, and it will matter to our child. Jake was quiet again. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing and cowboys calling to each other as they finished their work for the day. I care about you, Eleanor, Jake finally said. What happened between us that night? It wasn't just because of the storm. I've been attracted to you since the day you arrived. Eleanor felt her heart jump. Really? Really? But I don't know if that's enough to build a real marriage on, especially with a baby coming. What does that mean? It means I want to try. If you want to try too, we can make this arrangement real. Be a real family. Eleanor felt tears in her eyes. What about Victoria? What about her? She wants you back, and her father can give you everything you ever dreamed of. Jake turned to face her fully. Eleanor, do you want to try to make this marriage work? Yes, she whispered. Then Victoria doesn't matter. The business opportunities don't matter. What matters is you and me and this baby. Eleanor wanted to believe him, but she was scared. Are you sure? Jake reached out and took her hand. I'm sure. Are you? Eleanor squeezed his hand. I'm sure. Jake leaned over and kissed her gently. It was the first time he had kissed her since their wedding day, and it felt like a promise. But even as Eleanor kissed him back, she couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria wasn't going to give up easily. And she was right. The next morning, Eleanor woke up feeling sick as usual. But when she went downstairs, she found Victoria in the kitchen with Betty. Eleanor, Victoria smiled brightly. I was just telling Betty how sorry I am about yesterday. I think we got off on the wrong foot. Eleanor was suspicious, but she tried to be polite. It's fine. I brought you some tea. A special blend my mother always used for delicate stomachs. Victoria handed Eleanor a cup of steaming tea. It smelled strange, but Eleanor didn't want to be rude. Thank you, she said, taking a small sip. Betty was telling me how you've been feeling poorly in the mornings. Victoria continued. I hope it's nothing serious. Eleanor and Betty looked at each other. How much had Betty said? Just a little stomach trouble, Eleanor said carefully. Victoria's smile got bigger. Of course. Nothing to worry about, I'm sure. After Victoria left, Betty frowned at the teacup in Eleanor's hands. What kind of tea did she say that was? Betty asked. She didn't say exactly. Why? Betty took the cup and smelled it. Her face went pale. Eleanor, don't drink any more of that. Why not? Because I think Victoria knows you're pregnant. And this tea, some of the herbs in here aren't safe for expecting mothers. Eleanor felt cold all over. What do you mean? I mean, Victoria is trying to make you lose the baby. Eleanor stared at the innocent-looking cup of tea. Victoria wasn't just trying to win Jake back. She was trying to eliminate the one thing that connected Eleanor to Jake forever. The baby. Eleanor stared at the cup of tea in horror. Are you sure? Betty nodded grimly. I've been helping women with babies for 30 years. Some of these herbs can cause a woman to lose her child. Victoria knows exactly what she's doing. Eleanor felt sick to her stomach, and this time it wasn't from the pregnancy. She really would do that? She wants Jake back, and your baby is standing in her way. Eleanor sat down heavily. What should I do? Tell Jake right now. I can't. He's meeting with those cattle buyers from Chicago. This is the biggest deal of his life. Eleanor, this is your baby's life. Before Eleanor could respond, they heard horses outside. Jake was back earlier than expected, and he looked angry. Where's Victoria? He demanded as he came into the kitchen. She left about an hour ago. Why? Betty asked. Jake held up a piece of paper. Because Tom overheard her talking to someone at the hotel. She's been spreading rumors about Eleanor all over town. Eleanor felt her heart sink. What kind of rumors? That you tricked me into marriage. That you were already pregnant when you arrived. That the baby isn't mine, Eleanor gasped. That's not true. I know it's not true. But Victoria's convincing other people it is. Mrs. Peterson from the bank wouldn't even look at me when I walked past her on the street. Betty held up the teacup. Jake, there's something else you need to know. She told him about the tea and what she suspected. Jake's face went dark with anger. She tried to poison you? We don't know for sure, Eleanor said quickly. Maybe Betty is wrong about the herbs. I'm not wrong, Betty said firmly. Jake started pacing around the kitchen like a caged animal. This has gone too far. I'm going to town to have a talk with Victoria. Wait, Eleanor said. Let me come with you. No, you need to rest. And I don't want you anywhere near Victoria. Jake, she's trying to destroy our marriage. I should be there. Jake stopped pacing and looked at her. Eleanor, is that what you want? A real marriage? Yes. Then let me handle this. Trust me. Eleanor wanted to argue, but she could see the determination in Jake's eyes. He was finally ready to fight for their relationship. After Jake left, Eleanor spent the afternoon worrying. What if Victoria convinced him that Eleanor really was trying to trap him? What if her father offered Jake so much money that he decided it was worth ending the marriage? Betty tried to distract her with wedding planning. If you and Jake are going to make this marriage real, you should have a proper wedding ceremony. Not that rushed business with Judge Wilson. What if Jake changes his mind? He won't. I've seen the way that man looks at you. He's in love, even if he doesn't realize it yet. Eleanor wanted to believe that, but she was scared. Everything felt so uncertain. Jake didn't come home until late that evening. Eleanor was waiting for him in the parlor, too nervous to sleep. How did it go? She asked as soon as he walked in. Jake sat down beside her on the sofa. He looked tired but satisfied. Victoria and her father are leaving tomorrow. Really? Really. I made it very clear that I'm not interested in their business deals or anything else they're offering. Eleanor felt a wave of relief. What did Victoria say? She tried to convince me that you're just using me. Said I'd regret choosing you over her. Jake smiled slightly. I told her she was right about one thing. I would regret it. I'd regret it for the rest of my life if I let her convince me to give up the best thing that ever happened to me. Eleanor felt tears in her eyes. You said that? I meant it. Jake took her hands. Eleanor, I need to tell you something. What? I've been an idiot. Ever since that night during the storm, I've been fighting my feelings for you. I kept telling myself this was just a business arrangement, that I shouldn't get attached because you'd probably want to leave eventually. I don't want to leave. I know that now, and I don't want you to leave either. I want us to be a real family. You, me, and our baby. Eleanor started crying. I was so scared that you'd choose Victoria. Never. Jake pulled her closer. I love you, Eleanor. I think I've loved you since the day you arrived. Even though I was too stubborn to admit it, I love you too. Jake kissed her, and this time it felt like the beginning of something wonderful instead of the end of something complicated. But their happiness was short-lived. 3 months later, Eleanor went into labor early. The baby wasn't due for another month and everyone was worried. The doctor came from town, but he looked concerned. The baby is coming too fast, and it's not in the right position. Eleanor was in pain and scared. Jake held her hand and tried to look calm, but she could see the fear in his eyes. Is the baby going to be okay? She gasped between contractions. We'll do everything we can, the doctor said. The labor lasted 18 hours. Eleanor had never felt such pain in her life. Jake stayed with her the whole time, even when the doctor said he should leave the room. I'm not leaving my wife, Jake said firmly. Finally, after what felt like forever, Eleanor heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby crying. It's a boy, the doctor announced, but his voice was worried. He's small, and he's having trouble breathing. Eleanor tried to sit up to see her baby, but she felt weak and dizzy. Is he going to live? I don't know, the doctor said honestly. The next few days will be critical. Jake kissed Eleanor's forehead. He's going to be fine. He's a fighter, just like his mother. For 3 days, their tiny son struggled to breathe. Eleanor and Jake took turns holding him, talking to him, praying that he would get stronger. Betty and Tom and all the ranch hands were worried too. Even Judge Wilson came by to check on them. On the 4th day, the baby's breathing got easier. By the end of the week, he was nursing well and crying loudly when he was hungry. What should we name him? Eleanor asked as she held their son. Jake looked at the baby with wonder. How about Thomas after Tom? He's been like a father to me since I came to Montana. Thomas McKenna, Eleanor said softly. I like it. As Eleanor recovered from the difficult birth, she and Jake grew closer than ever. They took care of baby Thomas together, taking turns walking the floor when he cried at night. Jake was surprisingly good with the baby, gentle and patient. I never thought I'd be good at this, he told Eleanor one evening as he rocked Thomas to sleep. You're a natural father. I had a good teacher. watching you with him. You amaze me every day. Eleanor felt complete in a way she never had before. She had a husband who loved her, a beautiful baby, and a home where she belonged. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jake brought up something that had been on his mind. Eleanor, I want to ask you something. What? Will you marry me? Eleanor laughed. We're already married. I mean, really marry me. With a real wedding in the church with all our friends there. I want to marry you because I love you, not because of a mistake. Eleanor felt tears of happiness in her eyes. Yes, I'll marry you. Jake pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a beautiful ring with a diamond that sparkled in the evening light. I had this made special for you. I wanted you to have something that was just yours, not part of the business arrangement. Eleanor held out her hand, and Jake slipped the ring onto her finger next to the simple gold band from their first wedding. It's perfect, she whispered. As they planned their second wedding, Eleanor thought about how much her life had changed. A year ago, she was a lonely governess with no family and no prospects. Now she was surrounded by people who cared about her. She had Jake, who loved her completely. She had baby Thomas, who filled her heart with joy every day. She had Betty and Tom and all the ranch hands who had become like family. Most importantly, she had found where she belonged, not just in Montana but in Jake's arms in their life together. The scared young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach was gone. In her place was a confident wife and mother who knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Eleanor thought their troubles were over after Victoria left town. She and Jake were planning their real wedding. Baby Thomas was growing strong and healthy, and life on the ranch was peaceful. But she should have known that Victoria wouldn't give up so easily. The trouble started 3 months after Thomas was born. Eleanor was in town with Betty, buying supplies and showing off the baby to the friendly shopkeepers, when she overheard 2 women talking outside the general store. I heard she was already expecting when she arrived. One woman whispered, that's why she trapped poor Jake into marriage. And now the Sterlings are saying the marriage isn't even legal, the other woman replied. Something about forged documents. Eleanor felt her blood run cold. She quickly finished her shopping and hurried home to tell Jake what she had heard. Jake was in his office when she burst in carrying Thomas. They're back, she said breathlessly. Victoria and her father. They're spreading more lies about us. Jake looked up from his papers, frowning. What kind of lies? Eleanor told him what she had overheard. Jake's face got darker with each word. They're saying our marriage isn't legal. That's what I heard. Jake, what if they're right? What if there really was something wrong with the paperwork? Jake stood up and pulled Eleanor into his arms, careful not to wake the sleeping baby. Even if there was, it doesn't matter. We're a family now. We love each other. No piece of paper can change that. But Eleanor was worried. What if they take you to court? What if they try to take Thomas away from me? They can't take Thomas. He's our son. But if our marriage isn't legal, then legally I'm just an unmarried mother with no rights. Jake's jaw tightened. That's not going to happen. I won't let it happen. The next day, Jake rode into town to find out what the Sterlings were planning. When he came back, his face was grim. It's worse than we thought, he told Eleanor. Victoria's father has hired a lawyer from Denver. They're claiming that the original marriage documents were forged, and that means our marriage never happened. Eleanor sat down heavily, clutching Thomas to her chest. Can they prove it? I don't know. The lawyer they hired is good at finding problems with legal documents. Even if he can't prove forgery, he might be able to find some technicality that makes our marriage invalid. What does that mean for us? Jake knelt down in front of her chair. It means we fight. We hire our own lawyer. We prove that our marriage is real and legal. What if we lose? We won't lose. But Eleanor could see the worry in Jake's eyes. If they lost in court, Eleanor would have no legal claim to anything. The ranch, the money, even Thomas, legally it would all belong to Jake alone. And if Victoria convinced him to leave Eleanor, there's something else, Jake said quietly. Victoria has been telling people that you're not fit to be a mother. She's saying you're too young and inexperienced to raise a child properly. Eleanor felt angry tears in her eyes. That's ridiculous. Thomas is healthy and happy. I know that. But Victoria is convincing some people in town. Mrs. Peterson asked me yesterday if I was sure you knew how to take care of a baby. Eleanor looked down at Thomas, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. She had never felt more protective of anything in her life. What can we do? We show everyone that Victoria is wrong. We prove that you're a wonderful mother and wife. And we fight this legal challenge with everything we have. The next few weeks were the hardest of Eleanor's life. Every time she went to town, people stared at her and whispered. Some of the women who had been friendly before now acted cold and distant. Even at church, Eleanor felt like people were judging her. The only bright spot was the support from the people who really knew them. Betty was fiercely loyal, telling anyone who would listen that Eleanor was the best thing that had ever happened to Jake. Tom and the other ranch hands made it clear that they respected Eleanor and would stand by the family. Judge Wilson, who had performed their original ceremony, insisted that the marriage was completely legal. But the legal challenge was serious. Jake hired the best lawyer he could find, a smart woman named Patricia Hayes who came from Denver to help them. She spent days going through all the paperwork from their marriage. The documents look legitimate to me, she told Jake and Eleanor, but the Sterling's lawyer is claiming that the signature on one of the forms doesn't match the others. He says it proves the document was forged. Is that possible? Eleanor asked. Anything is possible. People's handwriting can vary, especially if they're tired or stressed. But if we can't prove the signature is real, we might have problems. Eleanor felt sick. What happens if they win? Patricia looked at her sympathetically. If the court decides your marriage is invalid, you would have no legal rights as Jake's wife. He could choose to marry you again, of course, but legally speaking, everything would belong to him alone. Including Thomas? Legally, yes. Though no judge would take a baby away from his mother without very good reason. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She walked the floor with Thomas, thinking about everything they could lose. Not just the ranch or the money, but the life they had built together. What if Jake decided it was easier to start over with someone like Victoria, someone who wouldn't bring legal problems and gossip? Jake found her in the nursery at midnight, rocking Thomas and crying quietly. What's wrong? He asked softly. I'm scared, Eleanor whispered. What if we lose everything? Jake sat down in the chair next to her. Eleanor, look at me. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. Do you remember what I told you the day Thomas was born? Jake asked. You said he was a fighter like his mother. That's right. And do you remember what I said when I gave you this ring? Jake touched the diamond ring on her finger. You said you wanted to marry me because you love me. And that hasn't changed. No matter what happens in court, no matter what lies Victoria spreads, that will never change. You are my wife in every way that matters. Thomas is our son. This is our family. Eleanor wanted to believe him, but she was still scared. What if they make you choose between me and everything else you've built? Jake was quiet for a moment. Eleanor, 13 years ago, I came to Montana with nothing but a horse and $50. I built this ranch from scratch, working 18-hour days and saving every penny. I thought that was the most important thing in my life. And now I know better. This ranch means nothing without you and Thomas. If I had to choose between losing everything I own and losing you, I'd choose you every time. Eleanor felt some of her fear melt away. Really? Really? We're going to fight this, and we're going to win. But even if we don't win in court, we'll still have each other. That's all that really matters. The court case began 2 weeks later. Eleanor had never been so nervous in her life. She wore her best dress and tried to look confident, but inside she was terrified. Victoria looked beautiful and confident, wearing an expensive blue dress that probably cost more than Eleanor's entire wardrobe. Her father sat behind her, looking pleased with himself. The Sterling's lawyer was a thin man with cold eyes who made Eleanor feel like a criminal just by looking at her. He argued that the marriage documents were forged, that Eleanor had tricked Jake into marriage, and that she was too young and inexperienced to be a proper wife and mother. Patricia Hayes fought back hard. She brought witnesses who testified that Eleanor was a loving mother and devoted wife. She showed evidence that the marriage documents were legitimate. She pointed out that the Sterlings had no real proof of their accusations, just suspicions and rumors, but the most powerful moment came when Jake took the stand to testify. Do you believe your marriage to Eleanor Hartwell is legal and valid? Patricia asked him. Yes, I do. And do you believe she married you for love or for money? Jake looked directly at Eleanor. She married me for love, just like I married her for love. Are you satisfied with her as a wife and mother? More than satisfied. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. The Sterling's lawyer tried to shake Jake's testimony, but Jake wouldn't be moved. He defended Eleanor fiercely, making it clear that he chose her freely and completely. When it was Eleanor's turn to testify, She was so nervous she could barely speak. But when the lawyer asked her why she married Jake, she found her voice. "I married him because I love him," she said clearly. "Not for his money or his ranch, but because he's a good man who makes me want to be a better person." "And what about the accusations that you're unfit to be a mother?" Eleanor looked at Thomas, who was sitting quietly in Betty's arms in the back of the courtroom. "My son is healthy and happy. He's the most important thing in my life. I would do anything to protect him and give him a good life." After 3 days of testimony, the judge said he would make his decision within a week. Eleanor and Jake went home to wait, not knowing if their family would survive the legal challenge. "Whatever happens," Jake told Eleanor that night, "we face it together." Eleanor held Thomas close and prayed that love would be enough to overcome lies and legal technicalities. Their whole future depended on one judge's decision. The week of waiting for the judge's decision was the longest week of Eleanor's life. She tried to keep busy with normal ranch activities, but every sound made her jump, thinking it might be news from town. Jake tried to act confident, but Eleanor could see he was worried too. He spent extra time with Thomas, holding him for hours and telling him stories about the ranch. Eleanor wondered if he was afraid this might be his last chance to be with his son if things went badly. On Thursday morning, Tom rode up to the house faster than usual. Eleanor's heart started pounding as she watched him tie up his horse and hurry to the door. "Judge made his decision," Tom announced, slightly out of breath. "Wants everyone in court at 2 o'clock. Eleanor felt dizzy. "Did he say what he decided?" "No. Just that he wants both families there for the announcement." Eleanor spent the morning trying not to think about what might happen. She fed Thomas and played with him, memorizing every little sound he made. She helped Betty with lunch, grateful for something to keep her hands busy. But her mind kept racing with worried thoughts. What if they lost? What if the judge decided their marriage wasn't legal? Would Jake still want to be with her? Or would the legal troubles make him realize he was better off without her? At 1:30, Jake helped Eleanor into their best carriage. Thomas was staying home with Betty, who promised to take good care of him no matter what happened. "Ready?" Jake asked, taking Eleanor's hand. "No," Eleanor said honestly. "But let's go anyway." The courthouse was packed. It seemed like half the town had come to hear the decision. Eleanor saw friendly faces. Judge Wilson, the doctor who had delivered Thomas, several of the ranch wives who had been kind to her. But she also saw people who had been whispering about her for weeks. Victoria and her father sat in the front row looking confident. Victoria was wearing another expensive dress, and she kept glancing at Jake like she expected him to change his mind at the last minute. The judge came in, and everyone stood up. He was an older man with gray hair and serious eyes. Eleanor couldn't tell anything from his expression. "Please be seated," the judge said. "I have reviewed all the evidence in the case of Sterling versus McKenna regarding the validity of the marriage between Jake McKenna and Eleanor Hartwell McKenna." Eleanor squeezed Jake's hand so tightly she was probably hurting him, but he didn't complain. "This case has required me to examine not only legal documents, but also the nature of marriage itself," the judge continued. "The plaintiffs have argued that certain signatures on the marriage documents may have been forged and that the marriage was entered into under false pretenses." Eleanor's heart sank. This sounded like bad news. "However," the judge said, and Eleanor felt a tiny spark of hope. "After careful examination by 3 different handwriting experts, I find no evidence that any documents were forged. The variations in signatures appear to be normal differences that occur when people are writing under stress or in unfamiliar circumstances." Eleanor felt Jake's hand relax slightly in hers. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "even if there had been irregularities in the paperwork, the marriage has been consummated. Both parties have lived as husband and wife for over a year, and they have produced a child together. Under territorial law, this constitutes a valid, common-law marriage regardless of any potential paperwork issues." Victoria's confident expression was starting to fade. "As for the accusations that Mrs. McKenna is unfit to be a wife and mother, I have heard testimony from multiple witnesses about her character and abilities. The evidence shows that she is a devoted mother and a loving wife who has contributed significantly to her husband's household and business." The judge paused and looked directly at Eleanor and Jake. "Most importantly, both Mr. and Mrs. McKenna have testified under oath that they love each other and choose to remain married." This court has no authority to dissolve a marriage between two people who wish to stay together, especially when that marriage has produced a child. Eleanor felt tears of relief starting in her eyes. Therefore, the judge said formally, I find that the marriage between Jake McKenna and Eleanor Hartwell McKenna is completely legal and valid. The request to annul this marriage is denied. The courtroom erupted in noise. Some people cheered, others grumbled. Eleanor heard Betty's voice whooping with joy from the back of the room. Victoria's face had gone white with shock and anger. Her father was already gathering his papers, clearly planning to leave town as quickly as possible. Jake pulled Eleanor into his arms right there in the courtroom, not caring who was watching. We won, he whispered in her ear. We won. Eleanor was crying too hard to speak, but she hugged him back with all her strength. Judge Wilson came over to congratulate them. I never had any doubt, he said with a smile. I've performed a lot of wedding ceremonies, and I could tell you two were meant for each other from the very beginning. As they left the courthouse, people gathered around to offer congratulations. Many of the same people who had been whispering rumors just days before were now acting like they had supported Eleanor all along. But Eleanor didn't care about them. She only cared about getting home to Thomas and celebrating with the people who had stood by them through everything. The celebration at the ranch that night was one of the happiest times of Eleanor's life. Betty had cooked a special dinner, and Tom had brought out his fiddle to play music. Even some of the ranch hands joined in, singing songs and telling stories. Thomas slept peacefully through most of the noise, but when he woke up, he seemed to sense that something good had happened. He smiled and laughed more than usual, making everyone else smile too. Later that evening, after everyone else had gone home, Eleanor and Jake sat on their porch swing with Thomas between them. The stars were bright overhead, and they could hear cattle settling down for the night in the distance. I have something for you, Jake said, reaching into his shirt pocket. What is it? Jake pulled out a folded piece of paper. A deed? Eleanor looked at him in confusion. A deed to what? To half the ranch. I want your name on the ownership papers. Not because the court said our marriage is legal, but because you're my partner in everything we do. Eleanor stared at the paper. Jake, I can't accept this. You built this ranch yourself, and now we're building our future together. You've helped make this place more successful than it ever was when I was alone. You belong here, Eleanor. This is your home too. Eleanor felt tears in her eyes again. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. As Eleanor signed her name next to Jake's on the deed, she thought about how much had changed since that confused day when she first arrived. She had come to Montana as a frightened young woman with no family and no future. Now she was a wife, a mother, and a landowner. She belonged somewhere. 6 months later, Jake surprised Eleanor with another request. Will you marry me? He asked one morning at breakfast. Eleanor laughed. We're already married. Twice if you count the ceremony we had in the church after Thomas was born. I want to marry you again. Every year on our anniversary. I want to keep choosing you over and over again. Why? Jake smiled. Because I never want you to forget that I didn't just marry you by accident. I marry you on purpose every single day. So they started a tradition. Every year on the anniversary of their first confused wedding ceremony, they would have a small ceremony with just their family. Judge Wilson would say a few words, Eleanor would wear wildflowers in her hair, and they would promise to love each other for another year. As the years passed, their family grew. Thomas got a little sister named Rose and then another brother named William. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful cattle operations in Montana Territory. Eleanor proved to be not just a loving wife and mother, but also a talented businesswoman. She helped Jake expand into horse breeding, and her careful record-keeping and letter-writing skills helped them build relationships with buyers all across the country. What had started as helping with paperwork grew into a true partnership in running the ranch. Victoria Sterling never returned to Montana. Eleanor heard through town gossip that she had married a banker's son in San Francisco and was living the wealthy city life she had always wanted. Eleanor felt no anger toward Victoria anymore, only gratitude that her interference had forced Eleanor and Jake to fight for their love and prove how strong it really was. Betty stayed with them for many years, becoming like a grandmother to the children. She taught Eleanor everything she knew about cooking and running a large household. When Betty finally retired, she stayed in a small house on the ranch property, where the children would visit her every day to hear stories and get spoiled with cookies. Tom became Jake's business partner and eventually married a widow from town who had 2 children of her own. The ranch became home to a large, extended family of people who cared for each other. One evening, 5 years after their legal troubles, Eleanor was sitting in the same garden where she and Jake had once talked about whether he wanted their baby. Now Thomas was a sturdy 5-year-old who loved helping his father with the horses. Rose was 3, and already showing signs of being as stubborn as her mother. Baby William was just learning to walk. Jake found her there just like he had so many times before. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting down beside her.